Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for the hiatus. It's been a few months since I uploaded. Uh, to make a long story short, there was a lot of tomfoolery with a little bit of hijinks thrown in there. And what's honestly happened is I've felt the crushing weight of becoming an adult. I work a full-time job now, 8 hour, about probably 40 hours a week, Monday through Friday. Really falling into that corporate grind, even though I'm a school teacher, but yeah, it's just a busy schedule. It's been hard to make time to make these videos, but no excuses on the Bookman channel. Okay, we're back to it. I'm gonna start uploading on every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Starting with this video. But today we have Sci-Fi Sunday. It's a new segment on the channel. I just came up with it just now. On Sundays, we're gonna review sci-fi books, and I got two that I've read in the time between my last review and this one. So we're going to talk about today. So cue the intro. All right, so the two novels on the itinerary today, we have Thorns by Robert Silverberg. I picked this up at a library, like book sale. They were trying to get rid of a lot of books, overstock or whatever. And just look at this cover. Let me get a good close up on it. Yeah, we got like Harrison Ford if he had a love child with a piglet, and then we have Lorna Kelvin, one of our other main characters in that book. Um, and the other one is, listen, I had to jump on the hype train. Everybody's talking about this book. I just watched the movie adaptation last night, which I thought was really well done. And of course, we're talking about Project Hail Mary. And I had to get the cover with my guy Ryan Gosling on it because he's just a very handsome man, and I want to see it on my bookshelf. So we're gonna talk about the lesser of the two, in my opinion, first, and that's gonna be Thorns by Robert Silverberg. So let's talk about it. If I had to wrap the review for Thorns in maybe a sentence or two, sort of encapsulate what I'm going to talk about, a very brief summary is that, some things did work pretty well for me, but there was just so much of it that also struck out. Uh, for example, there's like this like weird uh, creepiness pervading the text. Of course, our antagonist, it's okay for him to be creepy, right? You're not going to be rooting for Duncan Chalk, the sort of vampire capitalist who feeds on people's negative emotions and powerful emotions. Just based on that mechanism of his power alone, you're probably going to be somebody you're going to root for. So it's okay if he's like trying to get the 40-year-old and the 17-year-old to hook up. But when it's our protagonist also being okay with it, maybe you could argue that it's kind of out of his control. It was something that was sort of puppeteered by Duncan Chalk to happen. And Lona Kelvin and Minna Burst are both, they have the connection of being isolated from society based on things that happen to them. So they have that reason to connect. But then again, he's still 40 years old and she's 17. It's just kind of weird, man. Like, what are we doing, Minna? Like you probably deserve to look like, one of the background Star Wars glubshitos that looks like a little piggy. Maybe it's because you're like hooking up with a 17-year-old. I don't know. This book came out a long time ago. The views were different back then, but I still think it's kind of weird. All right, so to get off of the topic of Silverberg's freakness, let's talk about some of the things I thought were pretty strong in this book. Despite the creepy love story that's happening here. Some of these characters are pretty compelling. I mean, Minterburst, we have a man who was basically taken, he was molested by these aliens. He was tested on like a science test subject, and he comes back to Earth and he's been physically, biologically transformed. And so, no pun intended, it's alienated him from the rest of humanity. And we get a pretty, very striking representation of sort of depression with Mayor Burst in the beginning of this book. We get the idea that he spends a lot of time in his room in the dark. He tries to avoid mirrors by looking at himself, 'cause he's been defiled, and it's totally tanked his self appreciation or self respect. And you know, the way that Silverberg portrays it, I thought he did was pretty well done. He's not gonna tell you, uh, Minner cried in his room because he's ugly. It's just you see through his actions the way he's living, this sort of trash around him in this isolated dark room. You learn, wow, this guy's not in the right headspace. He does the same thing with Lona Kelvin as well, who is a woman whose eggs were taken from her body and impregnated, or fertilized would probably be the correct term. And so she has about like 50 or so children that she has never met, never will meet, and so she longs to meet them. She's a mother of children, and she's never going to get to see her kids. So imagine the post mortem there, and so he does a good job with that too, depicting uh, the how depression can look different, but he still does a good job of showing both sides, all the different sides to grief, I suppose, and how that looks. And right off the rip, you kind of have a reason to root for these characters, right? Or for them to work together to sort of try to carve out some sort of happiness in their life because a lot has been done against their will, and so that gets you rooting for the characters early. So that was very smart on Silverberg's behalf. And of course, our main antagonist and I'd say the third central character in this story, Duncan Chalk, is also a pretty interesting character, and I think it does through his character, maybe Silverberg reveals to us some things about the society we live in, right? We have Duncan Chalk, who is this sort of super capitalist vampire whose main goal, really, he has enough money to do whatever he wants. So money really isn't his goal that he's striving to achieve anymore. It's to get the greatest fix, the greatest high that he can off of negative, very powerful emotions, because that's what feeds him. And this is the motive behind him forcing Lona Kelvin and Minter Burris together, because he has a good idea that their relationship will never work out. They'll never be a good fit for each other, and it will end probably pretty badly because these are two very hurt, very broken people trying to, help each other, fix each other. And, that's a very hard thing to try to achieve when you have two people who are very hurt. So he knows this probably won't end well, and he manufactures it so he can get that high that he needs when when later in the book when Lona and Minner get into huge arguments with each other and end up very much resenting each other a lot. Um, and so, what does that say about, our relationships to our world, right? How, maybe some of the people in the higher echelons maybe try to take advantage of the common man for their own fixes, their own needs, and maybe not looking out for us like they should. There's a commentary there to be had with his character, which is interesting. The last thing I'll give Silverberg credit for here is that, I touched on this earlier with the character work, but his accurate depiction of a dysfunctional relationship, because we learn through the book and through the characters, dialogue and internal monologues that, Lona and Minner do care for each other, but they also grow to a part where a romantic relationship is just something that's not possible, right? They're too resentful of each other. They're not a good fit. Obviously, Lona is on a different um, has a different mental capacity than Minner, who is a 40-year-old former uh, vessel captain, and Lona is 17 years old. I mean, what are they going to have in common? Um, and so it's sort of like they're forced into this romantic love relationship when really they probably should have just been a sort of friendship dynamic to help each other through their grief, but instead they are sort of their hand is forced, or well, they still had the choice, but still they choose to go to the romantic route, and that doesn't work. And I think that this is something that's evident in our world. You see it all the time, right? Two people who, they care for each other, of course, but maybe a romantic relationship isn't the route that they, or the type of bond that they need to have that's best for them. Um, and so I think Silverberg does a good job of showing that here, that, sometimes the relationships are complicated, right? People can care for each other, but not be good romantic partners for each other. And so, yeah, so Silverberg does a good job with that. So then we finally reach the ending of this book. Eventually, Minner and Lona split. They both sort of catch on to what Duncan Chalk's goal was all along, which was not to help them heal or to help Minner get a brain transplant into a normal human body or to help Lona see her kids. Those were all lies he was telling, and parts of his scheme to get that gigantic high off of their distaste for one another towards the bitter end of their relationship. And they come together. They go to his like little fortress that he has, and they use their uh they use sort of like telekinetic bond with each other to sort of key blast like on some Dragon Ball Z stuff, and then they kill Duncan Chalk, and that's kind of the end. Maybe a bit Deus Ex Machina. I don't really There wasn't much explanation for how Lona and Minner were able to accomplish this feat at the end of the book, which was another drawback for me. But yeah, I would say this book was decent. It was an interesting idea that was explored, and maybe I would have maybe took a different avenue, maybe not have went the romance route with Lona and Minner. Maybe there's somewhere else, some other way we can explore dysfunctional relationships and hurt people trying to recover than making the 40-year-old and the 17-year-old sleep with each other. I don't know. It was a bit weird. I think the writing was good. Um, if you are, I don't know, a surgeon, maybe you would like this book because some of the like surgical jargon that he uses or like the scientific jargon he uses here, it's definitely not like Andy Weir. That's the one thing I'll give Andy Weir credit for when we talk about Project Hail Mary, but it's like if you're not in the field, you don't understand these words, if you're not using your little dictionary, you're kind of like it's kind of lost on you. You're like, okay, like I get this is kind of cool, but I'm not here for the doctor footnotes. I'm here for the story. But I mean, overall, I think the pros and the cons are pretty even to each other. I'd say this book levels out about your average book, maybe like a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I wasn't really This wasn't a book that I was thinking about for a while after I read it. So, but I mean, it was a cool concept, cool idea. Um, there was some body horror as well, body horror elements, especially with Minner. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, like maybe if you watch like The Fly and you're like, man, that's pretty cool, maybe you would like this book because there is that body horror element with Minner and with Duncan Chalk. So, yeah, uh, decent read. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so the final book for Sci-Fi Sunday that we're gonna review is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I'm gonna say it right here just so it's there for the review, so you can see the word Andy. Um, I'm just gonna start off this section of the video with just like something to get the click engagement going. And that's that I didn't think this book was as great as it was hyped up to me online. Um, and maybe that's just a big issue we have nowadays in the book talk, bookstagram era. Is some of these books are maybe getting more praise than they deserve. Not saying that Project Hail Mary doesn't deserve the praise it gets. I mean, I think maybe it was a little bit overrated uh, compared to what uh, my thoughts going into the book. I'm trying to think of the word, but I can't think off the top of my head. But maybe that's my fault, not the people who were reviewing it. So maybe I should blame myself. Um, but Project Hail Mary it was a good read. I would like to touch on, since we talked about it in the Thorns review, and that's that Andy Weir does a great job of explaining these scientific concepts in a way that like someone who's not familiar with the field could understand, because there's a sort of repetition in this book that comes that is sort of like here's the next issue I'm coming here's the next issue that has arisen, here's my scientific solution to it. And the way he describes that scientific solution is in a way where you're like, okay, like I can understand that, I see what's happening now. I don't have to know all the scientific jargon and language associated with that subject to understand sort of where that I would say that's one place where Thorns by Robert Silverberg fell short, is he's using all these like complex terms and not doing much simple man prose to explain it, and so it's just kind of lost on you. But Andy Weir does a great job of explaining these like pretty complex scientific concepts in a way that the average Joe Blow can understand. So shout out to Andy Weir for that, man. The writing in prose itself is pretty simple. It's nothing too complicated. I would say it's probably like on the average American or United States reading level. Maybe I should say that because I don't think anybody can read anymore. It's in a way where you're not going to be the process is going to be lost on you. It's told in a pretty simplistic way. I would compare it to like a Ray Bradbury's type of style. and but the writing is still pretty impactful. You know, there's definitely lines in this book that still pack a lot of meaning in few words, which is always the sign of good writing, right? To say a lot with a little. And there is examples of weird doing this in this novel. I wish I wrote examples down because that would make, it's always good to have evidence. But we'll move on. So there is the amnesia aspect of this story, right? And I've heard some people moan and groan about it online, like, "Oh, amnesia, like that's just makes it's just a cop out for you to make the writing more interesting, the story more interesting, right? By not giving the reader all the information or having a character that already has all the information they need." Um, I think Weir does a pretty good job with it here. Maybe that's because, maybe I'm not feeling that fatigue because this is the first story I've really read with an amnesia element, except for maybe Slaughterhouse Five. We'll talk about that next Sci-Fi Sunday. But it's like it's an important element of the plot as well. It's not like it's just like, oh, I have amnesia. It's like it's actually tied into his full character arc, why he had to go through this sort of state of amnesia in the first place. So I think the fact that it is integral to the character's development, the amnesia part, it isn't like just a cop out. But also he does he wears a good job with it, because we do get snippets of how did Dr. Ryland Grace end up here? Who is he? Why is he here? What's his purpose? Stuff like that, which was really cool to sort of find out step by step. One thing I wish is that maybe the amnesia element was explored a little bit more. I think the first like third or the first fourth of the book, it's a pretty important element, right? And then as we go in the book, it's like we get these flashbacks, and I almost forgot why we were getting the flashbacks. Like I just imagined we were getting flashbacks, like the narrative of the story was jumping back in the timeline, which I totally forgot about the amnesia element at that point, to be honest. So maybe I wish it was still a prevalent thing, still something that Grace had to fight with or mention. There's even one part of the book where he's like, "Okay, I have amnesia. Let me start thinking about a train of thought, and maybe it'll come back to me." And I was like, "Ooh," he's like, "That's kind of meta, right?" Like he's working into trying to use his amnesia or try to use it as a tool, which maybe people with amnesia in real life have examples of them trying to think of things to get them down that timeline or that train of thought to discover more. So maybe that's just not a fair critique on my half, but I was kind of like, "Whoa, that's kind of too meta, man. Why is he doing that?" But yeah, I thought the amnesia element was cool, especially because by the end of the book, it is important to what we discover about Dr. Ryland Grace and how his growth is very exponential by the end of the book. Uh, Spoiler free. Another aspect I enjoy, being an educator of the youth myself, is the sort of teacher perspective and how real it is. Dr. Grace's reflections on being a teacher and sort of the pros and cons. That was something I enjoyed because, I feel like Andy Weir did a good job of detailing, the teacher's life. Let me find one line I thought was really good at doing that. All right, here I found it. Here's a quote. Anything to avoid the parking lot. A fleet of helicopter moms would be descending on the school to pick up their children. And if one of them saw me, they always had some complaint or suggestion. I can't fault someone for loving their kids, and God knows we could do with more parents being engaged in their kids' education, but there's a limit. And that is like perfectly summarizes the whole one of the biggest issues with education, and that is parent involvement. Um, Especially one thing I've saw is a lot of kids who do struggle in school. It's because their parents aren't involved, and so when you get a parent that is involved, you get excited, but sometimes it can be too much. But it's just stuff like that, sort of elaborations on the profession of being a teacher that maybe some people might not know about. I enjoyed that, and it was pretty accurate too. I would say the major drawback for me in this book would have to be there is a sort of repetition that happens, right? Where it's okay, let's as we're discovering who Grace is as a character, um, we're on this mission. All this issue would arise. Okay, let me come up with a scientific solution. Or I wrote something down right here that happens on a few occasions. Let me see. Yeah, so we'll have this moment where Rylan Grace will be like, "Well, originally I thought this, but no. After doing more thinking, it's actually like this." Kind of like how like when you use AI to type a prompt for you, and it always does like there's like a certain formula to it. It's like I thought this, but it was actually this. And that happened like on a few occasions, and so that kind of drew me out a little bit. It was something I picked up on. I was like, oh, like it kind of makes the story less. It kind of kills the pace of it, or maybe the like intrigue. Um, which is odd that I'm going to say that I actually did the pacing in this book was actually pretty good, I would say. Um, in parts. I'd say like the first like fourth and the last fourth, the pacing was pretty decent because every chapter left you with the next question, okay, or the next discovery, which I really enjoyed. The middle half of the book, we do get these like we do fall into that formula, and so it kind of draws a little bit in that moment. I would say that was probably the hardest part of the book for me to read was probably the middle half or the middle section of it. But that first fourth and that last fourth, the pacing was really tight. It was almost like a thriller writing, and I enjoyed that. That was really good. This isn't necessarily a critique, but one thing I was struggling with was to sort of pin down the Ryland Grace character. We sort of get this idea he's maybe like sort of a goofy, lighthearted kind of, or goofy, lighthearted, jumpy, scary, like type of character, right? And so when he meets another character in the book that is similar to Grace in that aspect, the doctor who created the Beatles that go on the Project Hail Mary to relay their discovery back or what they discover back to Earth so they can solve the issue. Um, he's like kind of like rude to him, and this was about like probably like the third, fourth section, three-fourths into the book, and it kind of just threw me for a loop because I thought I had understood who Grace was as a character, but then like I saw how he acted to this guy who's kind of similar to him, and I was like, "Ooh, why is he being rude to this guy? Why is he being mean to him?" It didn't really make sense for the character, but maybe that has something to do with Grace's own self-deprecation. So when he met somebody who was similar to him, his first reaction is to be rude or dismiss them because he dismisses himself in a certain regard. So maybe actually that's not a critique. I don't know. Now that I'm talking about it with you all and working through it, maybe I was wrong. Um, but we do get the full character arc, and we do get a pretty, I would say, fulfilling conclusion to Dr. Ryland Grace's character, which was another strength of the book. Yeah, so I guess just the repetitiveness was maybe something with the solving the issue thing was what got to me the most, and what maybe would lower my score or my ranking or my thoughts on this book. Um, or so this was another thing that kind of threw me off on reading this book. Um, uh, I'm not gonna dog on the left here, but this quote. Hold on, let me find it. So Strat and Ryland Grace, Strat's sort of talking about, who are we going to send on this Hail Mary mission? What group of people can we send with the most success? And they're sort of talking about Strat brings up the issue of maybe bringing people of different sexes who are attracted to each other because then maybe they could fall in love and maybe love and their connection could disrupt with the success of the mission. And so let me find it right here. Hold on. All right, so here's the quote. We have Ryland Grace. This is his response to Strat when she picks, who the top three astronauts will be. I put my hands to my chest in mock surprise. Goodness me, Dubois appears to be black. I'm surprised you allowed it. Aren't you afraid he'll ruin the mission with talk of rap music and basketball? I read that line, and I'll put it out there. I try to keep this stuff, ambiguous, but I'm a bit of a lefty on some issues. I will admit that. But this line right here, like what are we saying right now, bro? I mean, I don't know. I get the joke that he's making here, but it's like eh, to that point in the story, the argument was over sex, not race. So like, why did he even bring this? I guess he's trying to call Strat like she's a bigot or whatever, or bigotry or whatever. Um, but I read this line. I was like, Ryland Grace, you're trying too much, bro. I mean, you're a school teacher in the suburbs, dog. Like, what are you talking about? Now, of course, I agree with the sentiment of what he's saying, of course, but it's like I don't know. It just kind of threw me off. I'm like, what are we talking about right now? It was just um. I'm trying to put my finger quite on why maybe it bothered me, for him just to pull this out. Um, but I don't know. Sometimes I think, depending, of course we need to advocate for people who aren't in our group or whatever, but also like sometimes maybe we overstep too far and we sort of fall into this savior complex, right? When these people, they're capable people as well. Like they speak on their behalf, they achieve great things. I mean, we just saw Artemis 2 did the loop around the moon, and the crew, we had a minority, a person of color on the crew. We also had a woman on the crew, and so it's like these people are capable of, defending themselves, I guess, and we need to defend them too, but like not overstep. I think there's a line there, and it's just like quotes like this. I'm like, what do we? Why? Why? I feel like you're going too far to the point where maybe it might be a little bit disrespectful. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong there. That's just one thought I had. All right, but not to get too political or anything, but that will probably wrap up what I had to say about Project Hail Mary. I think that it was a decent read. It was definitely, I would consider, hard sci-fi. So, we don't have uh people with, lightsabers or, space travel that's not really explained. It just kind of exists. Like this is near future sci-fi. Um, with there's usually like one element that might be a little bit of a far stretch. In this case, maybe it would be the astrophage, uh, but or xenonite would probably it the special chemical compound that the Iridians can make. But I mean, yeah, I think that book's pretty solid. I mean, if I had to give it a rating, probably 4 out of 5, maybe 3.5 out of 5. The repetitiveness in the middle, uh, maybe brings it down for me. We sort of do fall into a formula with this book. It's like, okay, I thought this, but it's actually this. I thought this, but it's actually this. Here's my solution. Here's the next problem. Here's the solution. Um, the bits, I think the amnesia works well to break up that sort of monotony with because we get to learn about Grace's character. Um, it was also very interesting to get the opportunity to learn about this fictional alien race that Andy Weir had created with the Iridians and sort of their anatomy and how their life on their world works. Why they don't have eyes is because they live on a planet with no light, so they wouldn't need eyes in the first place. Um, and that stuff was all super interesting too. Um, but yeah, so like, who would I recommend this book to? I mean, if you're a hard sci-fi fan, let's say like maybe The Expanse, or let me think of some other hard sci-fi that I've read. I can't think off the top of my head, but if you're a fan of like Interstellar, the movie, I think maybe you would like this book. It was an enjoyable read. Uh, again, repetitiveness, but nothing too crazy. Good read. Who else would I recommend this book to? Um, if you're sort of interested in first contact stories, how interaction with alien life might work, how we could work together to solve an issue, um, this might be a good one for you as well. And that will conclude the video for today, guys. That will wrap up Sci-Fi Sunday, the first edition, the first installment on the channel. If you guys liked the video, um, maybe drop a like. Comment if you read either of these books. What did you think? If there's anything I brought up in this video that you have counterpoints to or that you disagree with, please let me know in the comments too, so I can sort of, work through my thoughts and maybe see where I was wrong or ignorant. And so that will also be much appreciated. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.